For 4 years, the FBI hunted America's most dangerous domestic terrorist. This is how they caught him. In the early hours of March 3, 2018, a massive explosion rocked a natural gas pipeline outside Beaumont, Texas. The blast sent flames 300 feet into the air and cut off gas supplies to over 40,000 homes. Federal investigators would later determine that the explosion was no accident. It was the work of a domestic terrorist. Gregory Morrison had once been a pipeline supervisor for Gulf Coast Energy. For 12 years, he'd maintained the vast network of pipes that carried America's energy from refineries to cities across the South. But after corporate downsizing ended his employment, Morrison's expertise became a weapon turned against the very infrastructure he once protected. The Texas bombing was just the beginning. Over the next 8 months, Morrison struck 5 more times across Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana. Each attack was more sophisticated than the last. He targeted remote sections of pipeline, placing explosives with surgical precision to maximize damage while avoiding detection. The environmental impact was catastrophic. Millions of gallons of crude oil spilled into waterways, while natural gas fires burned for days. Federal agents quickly recognized the pattern. The bomber possessed intimate knowledge of pipeline infrastructure and security protocols. He struck during shift changes when monitoring was lightest. He used industrial-grade explosives, not homemade devices. This wasn't random destruction. It was calculated warfare against America's energy grid. The FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force took over the investigation in October 2018, after Morrison's 6th attack near Tulsa caused $50 in damage and forced the evacuation of 3 rural communities. Special Agent Rebecca Martinez, leading the task force, knew they were hunting someone extremely dangerous. Morrison's attacks were escalating, and intelligence suggested he had access to enough explosives for dozens more bombings. By December 2018, Gregory Gasman Morrison's name appeared on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. The charges were staggering: domestic terrorism, destruction of critical infrastructure, environmental crimes, and conspiracy. The reward climbed to $100,000. America's energy infrastructure was under siege, and one man held the blueprint for bringing it to its knees. On January 15, 2019, Gregory Morrison struck his 7th target, a processing facility near Lake Charles, Louisiana. South. The explosion was his most devastating yet, causing a chain reaction that shut down 3 interconnected pipelines and triggered mandatory evacuations across 2 parishes. But this time, Morrison made a critical error. A security camera at a nearby truck stop captured footage of a man matching Morrison's description purchasing diesel fuel just hours before the blast. When FBI agents arrived at the station the next morning, Morrison had vanished like smoke into the Louisiana bayou country. Agent Martinez's team immediately raided Morrison's abandoned apartment in Baton Rouge. What they found painted a disturbing picture of a methodical terrorist. The kitchen had been converted into a bomb-making laboratory, complete with timing devices, detonators, and enough ammonium nitrate to level a city block. Maps of pipeline networks covered every wall, marked with red X's indicating completed targets and potential future strikes. But Morrison himself was gone. His neighbors reported seeing him load a pickup truck in the middle of the night, just days after the Lake Charles bombing. By the time federal agents traced the vehicle registration, they discovered Morrison had sold the truck for cash to a private buyer in Mississippi, another dead end in a growing list. The FBI's initial pursuit focused on Morrison's known associates, former co-workers from Gulf Coast Energy, family members scattered across Louisiana and East Texas, and survivalist contacts he'd made through online forums. Agents conducted over 200 interviews in the first 6 months, tracking down every person who'd ever worked alongside the domestic terrorist. Each lead seemed promising at first. Morrison's ex-wife reported strange phone calls with no one speaking. A former co-worker claimed to have spotted Morrison at a hardware store in Arkansas. His brother received anonymous packages containing cash, Morrison's signature, Agents believed of someone trying to help family while staying hidden. But every lead evaporated under investigation. The phone calls were traced to telemarketers. The hardware store sighting proved to be mistaken identity. The cash packages came from a different relative entirely. By late 2019, the trail had gone completely cold. Morrison had adapted to life off the grid with the same methodical precision he brought to his bombing campaign. The FBI faced a chilling reality. Their target had disappeared into the vast expanse of rural America, and he knew exactly how to stay hidden. The manhunt for Gregory Morrison became one of the FBI's most extensive domestic terrorism investigations. Agent Martinez assembled a task force of 50 federal agents across 5 states, with field offices in Houston, Oklahoma City, and New Orleans coordinating a systematic search of America's oil country. The strategy was methodical and expensive. Agents established surveillance at truck stops along major pipeline routes, knowing Morrison would need to move between potential targets. They monitored hardware stores and agricultural supply companies where someone might purchase bomb-making materials. Every survivalist community, every off-grid compound, every remote cabin rental became a point of interest. Months turned into years. The FBI spent over $2 million on the Morrison manhunt, deploying thermal imaging helicopters, cellular tracking equipment, and undercover agents who infiltrated anti-government groups where Morrison might seek shelter. They followed hundreds of tips from the public, sightings at gas stations, reports of suspicious activity, even claims from psychics convinced they could locate the fugitive. In the spring of 2020, agents came tantalizingly close. A store clerk in rural Oklahoma reported selling industrial batteries and copper wire to a man matching Morrison's description. FBI teams surrounded the area within hours, establishing checkpoints on every road within a 50-mile radius. They found the abandoned campsite 2 days later. Cold ashes, discarded food containers, and tire tracks leading to a paved road where the trail disappeared. He was there, Agent Martinez later testified. We missed him by maybe 6 hours. Another near miss came in early 2021 when facial recognition software flagged Morrison at a Louisiana truck stop. By the time agents arrived, witnesses confirmed he'd been there, had even asked directions to a remote hunting area. But the trail went cold in the maze of bayou backroads, where cellular coverage was spotty and surveillance cameras non-existent. The investigation consumed Agent Martinez's team. They worked 12-hour days, followed every lead, knocked on thousands of doors. Local law enforcement agencies provided assistance, but the sheer scope of the search area, hundreds of thousands of square miles of rural territory, made the manhunt feel overwhelming. Morrison, meanwhile, had gone silent. No new attacks, no communications, no mistakes. He'd vanished into the American wilderness, leaving behind only the smoldering wreckage of his 7 pipeline bombings and the knowledge that he could strike again at any moment. On the morning of October 12, 2022, nearly 4 years into the manhunt, Agent Martinez received the call that would change everything. An anonymous tipster reported suspicious activity near Atchafalaya Basin, deep in Louisiana's bayou country. Someone was living in an isolated cabin, the caller claimed, and had been seen purchasing supplies that didn't match the lifestyle of a typical hunter or fisherman. The tip alone wasn't unusual. The FBI had received thousands over the years. But this one came with a crucial detail. The tipster had noticed the suspect making brief phone calls from the same location every few weeks, always lasting less than 5 minutes. Agent Martinez's team immediately contacted cellular providers serving the Atchafalaya region. The area was a dead zone for most carriers, with only one tower providing spotty coverage across hundreds of square miles of swampland. If someone was making regular calls from that specific location, the signal would ping the same tower every time. FBI technical analysts spent 3 days combing through cellular data, looking for patterns that matched the tipster's timeline. Then they found it. A series of brief outgoing calls, always originating from the same remote coordinates, always lasting under 5 minutes, always to different prepaid numbers that were immediately discarded. The calls had Morrison's signature written all over them. Quick contacts to avoid detection. probably checking on family or maintaining minimal outside contact. The phone itself was a burner, purchased with cash and using a false identity. But cellular tower triangulation didn't lie. Someone was making these calls from a fixed location deep in the bayou. On October 15th, Agent Martinez deployed a surveillance team to the coordinates. Using satellite imagery and topographical maps, they identified a single structure within the triangulation zone. A hunting cabin accessible only by boat, surrounded by cypress trees and Spanish moss, invisible from any road or aerial approach. 2 days of covert surveillance confirmed their target. Through high-powered scopes, agents observed a middle-aged white male matching Morrison's physical description and distinctive build. He moved with military-style precision, checking perimeters at regular intervals, always staying within tree cover when outside the cabin. The figure even matched Morrison's distinctive gait, a slight limp from an old workplace injury that had been noted in his FBI file. After 1347 days on the run, Gregory Morrison had finally made the mistake that would end his freedom. Agent Martinez requested SWAT backup and began planning the arrest operation. The net was closing, but Morrison remained armed, dangerous, and had nothing left to lose. At 5:47 a.m. on October 19, 2022, FBI SWAT teams surrounded the remote bayou cabin where Gregory Morrison had been hiding for nearly 4 years. Agents approached by boat through the pre-dawn darkness, their movements coordinated by radio silence and tactical precision. Morrison was awake when they arrived. Agents later discovered he'd been maintaining a military-style watch schedule, sleeping in 4-hour shifts and conducting regular perimeter checks. But his years of paranoia couldn't overcome the FBI's methodical approach. "Federal agents, you're surrounded!" Agent Martinez's voice echoed across the swamp at sunrise. Inside the cabin, Morrison barricaded himself with furniture and began destroying evidence. Agents could hear papers burning and electronics being smashed. For 3 tense hours, negotiators tried to convince him to surrender peacefully while SWAT teams maintained their positions in the oppressive Louisiana heat. The standoff ended when Morrison ran out of options. Cut off from escape routes, surrounded by federal agents, and facing the reality of his situation, he finally opened the cabin door and walked out with his hands raised. "I'm done running," Morrison told Agent Martinez as handcuffs clicked into place. The cabin search revealed the extent of Morrison's preparation for continued attacks. Agents found detailed maps of pipeline infrastructure across 6 states, enough explosive materials to carry out a dozen more bombings, and journals documenting his 4-year survival in the bayou. He'd been planning to resume his terrorism campaign, waiting for federal attention to turn elsewhere. Gregory Morrison's federal trial began in March 2023. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence: DNA linking him to explosive residue at bombing sites, surveillance footage placing him near multiple attacks, and the weapons cache discovered in his bayou hideout. Morrison's own journals provided a chilling window into his terrorist mindset, detailing his plans to bring down the entire energy system. On August 15, 2023, Morrison was convicted on 23 federal terrorism charges, including destruction of critical infrastructure, environmental crimes, and conspiracy to commit domestic terrorism. Judge Patricia Williams sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Morrison thought he could hide in America's energy heartland forever, Agent Martinez said after the sentencing. He was wrong. Today, Gregory Gasman Morrison sits in ADX Florence, the federal supermax prison in Colorado, serving his life sentence alongside other domestic terrorists. His bombing campaign, which caused over $200 million in damage and threatened America's energy security, is finally over. The FBI's manhunt lasted 1347 days, but justice was served. America's pipelines flow safely once again.